Hi, Roy. Phil. I'm good. Oh, good. I'm glad. Thank you for thinking of me. Okay. Okay. Should we do that? Okay. All right. All right. Okay. Okay. I see. Don't worry. I write all my books in bed, so I know. I moved. Actually moved a while back. I moved maybe 6 years ago. I was. It was time for a change. I'd been in Boston all my life. Ever since I moved to the U.S. And so I was a visiting writer at Stanford for a while. And then I got a tenure track position at Mills College in Oakland. So I'm associate professor there. Hmm? Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, all the time. I mean, we don't call it spoken word in as novelists, but I give readings all the time. I give them all over the place. It's kind of it's kind of what we do to sort of promote the work or to yeah. Hmm. Okay. I see. Yes, that'd be totally fine. But could you tell me a little bit about yourself before you begin? Are you? Yeah, yeah. Oh, I see. How many? 26, right? Right. I see. Mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I see. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I see. I see. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I haven't listened yet. I feel I'm embarrassed, but I will. Yeah, 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 yeah. I see. I see. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure. Right. It is. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. 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 But authors. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that. Well, that's a great thing because it's true, so much of the stuff is around music and sports and, marijuana and whatnot, vacation spot. It's so refreshing that you're doing this. Mm. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, precisely. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. Okay, that sounds great. I really appreciate your vision. Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. I see. All right. Okay. 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 Yeah, yeah. Okay. 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 I really appreciate that you said that as well. Yeah, yeah. 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 Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. 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 So, my name is Patricia Powell. I'm a novelist and also a professor of creative writing and literature, and I teach at Mills College in Oakland, California, and I live in a little town called Kensington, California. It's north of Berkeley, so I pretty much live in the Berkeley Hills, in Northern California. So I was born in Spanish Town, Jamaica, but I was raised by my great aunt who lived in Manchester near Mandeville, and so that's where I grew up. I went briefly to Manchester High School. I also went to Queens High School for girls in Kingston right before I left Jamaica. But I grew up in the country. I grew up with my great aunt, and we had a shop and we had a church. And I think I became a writer, listening to all those conversations in the shop and listening to all those preachings in the church. I didn't know I was going to be a writer. I was very good at a drawing when I was a kid, and I thought maybe I would go to art school. But then my family moved to the US. I moved here to live with my mother, my actual birth family for the first time. And and when I went to college, I thought I was going to do something useful, like I intended to study economics. I thought useful career, good immigrant, I'll make money, blah blah blah. Instead, I ended up studying creative writing, and I wrote the first draft of my first novel while I was an undergraduate at Wellesley College, which is a women's college in Massachusetts. Okay. Okay. Yeah, these are you know I cover this ground again and again in my novels because it's completely compelling to me, and also I don't know it, you know. I don't know why, for example, like there's a lot of secrets and silences in my family, and so I don't know why I couldn't stay with my birth family. I don't know if you know Caribbean people, you know, they have a tight lip, or they can have a tight lip. But there's a lot that I have heard as a kid and as a grown up, and each book I try to explore different aspects of it. But but my mother, you know, I was sort of adopted within the family. Like my great aunt took me from the time I was 3 months, and so I was with her until I left Jamaica at 16. And so she raised me, you know. By the time I came along, she was an older woman. Both her husbands, she had married twice, both of them were dead. And so, but she had a long history of raising all these sort of, I like to call them all these sort of unwanted children. And so I was the last one that she raised. And so but my mother would come. My mother and her husband would come, and they would visit. You know, I would see them maybe every couple of months. You know, so I knew who she was. But and I had a lot of questions. I imagine that I did, but it never seemed possible to ask anything. And so I all along I knew very early that I had to not ask and just sort of go along with the program, you know? And perhaps that's why I also became a writer. There were all these questions and there was no outlet for them. And so the minute I could write, you know, which was in college, actually before, but seriously in college, those were all the questions that I tried to answer for myself. I mean, my first book was an origin story. It was trying to create a history for myself out of the vacuum that sort of existed in my childhood. So yeah, so I attended Wellesley College from 1984 to 1988. I went in to study economics. I ended up studying English literature and creative writing. Those years there were really years of cocooning for me. It's a very nurturing environment. I stayed in the same dorm all 4 years. I didn't want to move. I think it was a bit of a shell shock for me to be there. But writing was this really fantastic outlet, you know, because I really got to, I wrote about my great aunt, I wrote about the shop, I wrote about the church, I wrote about all the men that would come to the shop and all the discussions they'd have and all the sermons they'd preach about in that church. And the the writing allowed me to sort of relive my childhood and to almost create a new childhood for myself in a way. And and after Wellesley, I took a year off, and then I went to graduate school. I went to graduate school at Brown University, and I studied. I did an MFA in creative writing there, and I wrote another draft of a novel while there. Hmm. Yeah. So when I was growing up in Jamaica, I was really lucky because it was right after independence, and I remember we read. There was really emphasis, great emphasis in the curriculum to teach Caribbean. I don't think it was called Caribbean then, to teach West Indian writers, you know? And I grew up, I still have this book, you know, I think it's called The West Indian Reader. And it had all these West Indian writers. And I grew up on those writers, you know, Andrew Salke and Sam Selvin and V.S. Naipaul. And also in the shop, you know, the radio was often turned on to Louise Bennett, who had a radio show. She also had a television show called Ring Ding. There were these also these radio shows in the evening. There was one called Dulcimina. It was this radio play that came on every night, and you know, talk about drama. So, and also just being the only child living with my great aunt, I was a voracious reader, you know. And so I read, and what the reading couldn't fulfill, I made up and drew, and those were sort of my additional stories that I created. So I feel like, you know, the shop and the church, and also all those books I had read as a child, and all those radio plays I had listened to on the radio. Plus, we also had in the little village where I grew up, there was a traveling library truck. And I think it came every couple of weeks to the shop. And people in the village would come to get books, and I would also get a load of books. And then there was also the public library in Mandeville, where I would go on Saturdays to get more books. So also, my grandfather was a Baptist minister, and whenever I would spend time with him, I think, you know, he gave me a copy of an illustrated copy of The Pilgrim's Progress, which is this book written by John Bunyan, you know, a British writer. Anyway, it was, you know, I loved the pictures, and I didn't really understand the story, but, you know, it was all about this journey, this adventure that this character was going on, and it was an adventure through life, and so books were really special. So when I moved to Boston, you know, I immediately went into high school, and I feel very lucky. And I've always, when I write about this, so by the time I came to the U.S., not long after I came, maybe within a year, my great aunt died, and so that was a really devastating time. But I also feel as if, and I've written about this, that you know, it's like when I went to the U.S., I feel as if she felt as if she could no longer take care of me, because I was sort of, I had gone too far. And so, but I certainly felt as if in death, she was sort of closer to me than even when we were in Jamaica. And I've always felt that all the people that came into my life immediately when I came to the US, I've always thought that she was responsible for them, that she had sort of put them in all these places that I could meet them, because it's kind of amazing, like all the people I met. And so in high school, my English teacher fell in love with me at once, swooped me up, and just kind of navigated me through the whole system, you know, the whole educational system. And she got me into this after school program that was all about, for talented high school kids. And it was just to really get you ready for college and get you completely immersed in the sort of US educational system. Because I was coming in, I entered high school in the 10th grade, which meant that in 2 years I would graduate and I would have to apply to college. And so she just sort of grabbed me up and sort of got me running. And she was this white woman. Her name is Margaret Spencer. She was my high school English teacher. She had this amazing laugh. You could hear her all the way down the corridor when she was laughing. And my great aunt had that kind of laugh. It was very effusive. It wrapped up everybody in it. You sort of had to chuckle when you heard it. And so she reminded me of my great aunt. She was a very sort of large personality and big heart. And so she was the first person that sort of swooped me up. And then in the after school program, the woman who ran that program, Joan Becker, had gone to Wellesley. And one afternoon, she drove me out there and she says, this is this really wonderful place and you can study all kinds of things. And you should definitely consider applying. And she took me to some other colleges as well. So I feel really lucky, because there was no way that just coming to this country and not really knowing anybody, but I felt really, really lucky. And then the minute I got to college, my writing professor, Jonathan Strong, and he just sort of shepherded me through the whole process. And he was my advisor of my novel. He wrote me letters of recommendation. He wrote me letters when I went on to graduate school. He was this wonderful mentor and advisor and a really good friend. So, and there were other people. But I always think of those three as really instrumental in my early years. And in my formative years of being in this country and also in my formative years as a writer. I remember one of the books, I told Miss Spencer I was going to study economics, and she said, yeah, 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 yeah. But then she gave me this anthology of Black women writers, and she inscribed, dear Patricia, I hope that one day your voice will be among these voices. So even though I had told her I was going to study economics, she thought that wasn't going to happen. So anyway, so I feel very fortunate. So I was I love going to nightclubs, and I went. Like I would go off with my friends into the city, and 3, 4 nights a week we were in Boston, and I loved that. I loved music. I loved drinking, because I think it reminded me of being in the shop, and I liked the whole atmosphere. The smell of smoke, the smell of cigarettes, like the taste of rum, the pounding music, the sort of dark environment with the strobing light, the kind of and the way in which you could be sort of taken up, like sort of music does that sometimes. It sort of takes you and I love that, and I did that quite a bit. Um, and I was, I dated. I had a part-time job. I was also the school projectionist. I showed all the movies, so I watched quite a few films. Um, and I read a lot, and I wrote a lot, and because I was also a very kind of I was a loner. I mean, writing requires a lot of solitude, but I think that was already in my nature. Hmm. So Medallion Trials is, yeah, so Medallion Trial came out in 1993. It was written, but it was written way before that. It just took me a very long time to find a publisher. I was telling a friend, I received about, 35 or 40 rejections for the novel, for the manuscript. And especially because I wanted to write that novel in some version of Jamaican dialect, Jamaican English. Um, the characters that I was writing about spoke that, and I wanted to record it because it's also a language that is, that 85% of the population, we speak that language. It's our language. It's our nation language, and yet it's also associated with backwardness and illiteracy and all of that. But it is our language, and I wanted to sort of record that. I wanted to give written authority to that language that is so often shunned. So the first novel, Medallion Trial, is sort of written in this Jamaican English, and it's a novel about this. It's a coming of age novel. It's about a girl's relationship with her mother and also with the great aunt who raised her. And it was sort of my attempt to make sense of my own sort of origin story and it's also a story about immigration. And in many ways, I think, even though I didn't know it yet, I think Medallion Trial, I think the themes that I explore in Medallion Trial are themes that I return to again and again in all my novels. They're themes of immigration, they're themes of parent-child relationships, they're themes of homosexuality, they're themes of religion, and they're themes of gender and sexuality, and and also of violence in families and how to sort of navigate through those kind of complex, relationships. So I return to those themes again and again in all different ways in all of my novels, but certainly in the first novel, those themes were all there. So I wrote that novel. I finished it in '88. I rewrote it in '91, and and then, I started sending it out to American presses, and I would get letters that said things like, only two people will read this novel because of the language. Why don't you change the language? But I didn't want to. And so I kept trying to send it around. And, I'm sure there were other reasons why it wasn't picked up. It wasn't just about the language, but Heinemann picked it up, Heinemann England, under the Caribbean Writers series. And I was really happy. It came out in '93. Perhaps they picked it up in '91 or so, because it takes about a year, by the time you sign the contract until the book actually comes out. Um, and it was part of the Caribbean Writers series, and I felt really part of a family of writers. V.S. Naipaul had been published by Heinemann. All the great West Indian writers had been published by Heinemann, men and women, and I really felt in good company. And then they took my next novel, which came out a year later, 1994, a small gathering of bones. When my novel came out, it was very interesting, because by 1991 I had started my first teaching position at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. I was as an assistant professor, and I was just teaching for the first time. But I didn't really feel like a writer until I had the book in hand, and after people would invite me to give readings, and they would sort of introduce the author Patricia Powell, and then It was only then that it started sinking in that I was indeed this writer, because nobody in my family had done that. It was really hard to fathom myself as such, and even though I had been writing and writing and writing, I couldn't call myself that, because it hadn't sort of become tangible yet. And my family, they do this thing when I'm around them. If they're talking about, like at Christmas or Thanksgiving, they get together and they're talking in the kitchen, blah, blah, blah. And I come in and a silence falls over the room because they don't want to talk about anything because they're always worried that, I'm going to scoop it up and it appears in a book. So they're very quiet around me. But my mother, when she read Medallion Trial, the only thing, I don't think my family, I don't think they read my work. I think that they are, I think they're a little frightened. Like, I think they all have my books on their bookshelves, but I don't think they actually read them. I think that they might feel a little nervous about how they perceive that they might be portrayed, or how they might be exposed. And my mother, though, when she read my first book, I think she read it. I don't know how far she got. She said to me, "You don't know what you're talking about." That was the extent of our conversation. So, I think subject matter, and then the whole fact that you expose stuff, you air the laundry. I think that's a real concern to them, because especially I'm airing stuff that's been sort of kept silent in my family for a long time, and it's true, and the subject matter too. They're good church people. You don't talk about these kinds of things. Um, you don't talk about men having sex with other men. You don't talk about the struggles that people might have with the church and how they feel as if, I remember one of the biggest fights I had with my mother was when I said that I wasn't going back to church. And she couldn't fathom anybody not going to church. She couldn't fathom anybody questioning anything. She couldn't fathom a life without the church, And, but I felt like, I was a queer kid coming up, and I didn't like the way he talked about us, and I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to have to listen to that, and I didn't tell her that that was why. But I said I didn't want to go back, and we had our first fight. It was the only fight we've ever had, and that was it. And for many years, I never went back to the church. For maybe 20. And then when I found that there are actually different ways of having a relationship with God or with the church, then it made it easier to go back. But no, they don't want. That's really difficult for them to understand. Um, that A Small Gathering of Bones, the second novel I wrote, which came out in 1994, is about a community of gay men in Jamaica dealing with AIDS. It's about how they create networks for themselves, how they support each other during this time. Many of them only have each other. They've been ostracized by family and by church, and and I wanted to write about their lives and make their lives really the precious things that they are. And so yeah, I think that that is uncomfortable for them. I think that's true, but I think Jamaica, like every place, U.S. included, we've had a hard time with gayness and with sexuality. Every place. I mean, I don't know a place that hasn't sort of struggled with that. Jamaica is no exception. But I think that values are changing all over the world, and now that we're a global community, information reaches us from all corners of the world. Like, we can't stay isolated, and we can't stay small, and we can't sort of keep beating up on people who are different from us. It's like the world is changing, we're evolving, consciousness is rising, and you know they have no choice. Um, so after a small gathering of bones, I wrote another novel called The Pagoda. Um, uh, oh, it's interesting because I felt as if A Small Gathering of Bones was the novel that really framed my career in a completely different way. Before, I was just this writer. After I wrote A Small Gathering of Bones, and the way it was received, and the places I was invited to, um, the way I thought about myself as a writer changed. I suddenly wanted to become a writer that made change happen in the world. I wanted to be a writer that my role as a writer was to end suffering in the way that I could. I wanted to change. I wanted to challenge ideas. I wanted to make change in people's lives. I wanted to write books that could be healing to people. Um, yeah, and I was terrified writing that book. I grew up in Jamaica. I grew up. There were two things happening when I was growing up around homosexuality. Um, I had some very close gay friends, and they were older than I was, but they would take me with them to all of these balls and community groups and you know church gatherings. Even though if the church knew about this, there would be hell and brimstone. There was this really great, close knit, tight community. And so on the other hand, there were people were up in arms on the roads, complaining about homosexual this and homosexual that. And on the other hand, there was a community. And another turning point for me was I went to see a therapist um, because I was I had these feelings, and I went to see a therapist, and she said, um, love, love, fall in love, be in the world, be productive in the world, and love whoever you'd like to love. If you like women, love them. And it was an amazing thing because that kind of conversation could have gone south, but she was great, and so there's that therapist, and there's this community, and so it was almost easy for me to write a book where people are being celebrated. And one of the most moving things that happened after that book came out is I was invited to an event in London, some kind of black gay organization in London, and they had invited me to come and talk about the work. And there were these men in the audience, and they were just weeping, and they said that they had never seen their lives portrayed in fiction in a positive way, and how heartbreaking it was to see themselves not as demeaned or terrible people, but as sort of loving people in fucked up relationships, but trying their best, trying to have a relationship with their God, trying to have family, trying to love, trying to, try to be ordinary. And that was very meaningful to me. And it really changed the way I began thinking about my writing after that. The other book that came out was The Pagoda, which is a novel about Chinese immigration to Jamaica. And growing up in Jamaica, growing up around Chinese people, I was always curious about the Chinese in Jamaica and what had brought them there and what were their experiences like in Jamaica during the 19th century when they first came. The Chinese came to Jamaica because slavery had ended, the plantations were deserted, the planters were losing a lot of money, and they appealed to the British government and they said, "We're losing all our money, we need help." And so Britain, in a relationship with China, started up what is it called? This trade between, indentureship, right? And, the Chinese workers were under the assumption that they could work for a few years, maybe 3 or 5, and get a certain amount of money, work in the Caribbean, and then return home. But they had no idea what was waiting for them. These were the same planters who had had slaves, so they were not good people, and so indentureship was another kind of slavery in a way, and many Chinese hung themselves because the work on the plantation was just horrendous. I mean, it was slavery all over again in a way. So, I did this research and it was just amazing to me, that whole history of indentureship, of both the Chinese that went to the Caribbean and also the Indians that went to the Caribbean. It's also a novel about cross-dressing, which I didn't know that the book was going to be about that. I wanted to write about a woman who had come from China to Jamaica to live. And I wanted to have a female character, but when I was doing the research, I found out that Chinese laws did not permit women to leave China. Only the men could leave, and the women couldn't leave until much later. So, but I was very much wedded to this idea of a female character because I had just written A Small Gathering of Bones, which is peopled mostly by men, and I kind of wanted to write about women. And so I decided that I would make her cross-dress, that she would dress up as a man and come to the Caribbean. And that opened the book up in this kind of amazing way that I didn't expect. And so I had to then do all this research on cross-dressing, and it turns out that some of those Chinese women did come to Jamaica dressed as men. I also found out that, in the 19th century, for single women to go anywhere, they had to dress as men. So it's a fascinating book for me to write. Because one of the things that I took from it was that the whole idea of I'm losing my thought. There's just some activity in the house, and I certainly sort of lost my thought. The idea of moving from one place to another, of moving from one language to another, of moving from one frame of reference to another, is a lot like cross-dressing, I think, because we're always sort of putting on a new persona to fit the situation. And that's kind of how I saw that main character. And so the idea of cross-dressing became this metaphor for the novel and a metaphor for immigration, that the person that you were around the time that you left, that person can survive in this new environment, which is how I felt as an immigrant to this country, you know. And so it, you know, in the beautiful way that novels can tell you what they want to be about. You know, Nadine Gordimer says that writing is an invitation, you know, and when you start the book, you're basically saying, okay, work through me. And so it's always a surprise to me how things transform. So I didn't know that it was going to be a book about cross dressing, but when I look at the book now, it's a perfect metaphor for the changes we go through and the different faces we put on when we move from situations to situations. Um, well, there are a few of them. I tell them to, right. So when we go into a classroom, here are the things that I like to tell students, you know, take risks in the writing, um, take risks, you know, try out perspectives that you would normally try out, you know, allow yourself to be uncomfortable. Um, don't avert the gaze, you know, don't be honest, you know, go deeply into the thing, explore it with great integrity. Um, you know, don't avert your eye. In fact, the more uncomfortable you are, the better the work will be because it means that you're encountering new territory. Um, and don't be lazy, you know, like, but maybe all of that is saying the same thing. Um, meet the work head on. Okay, okay. Can you hold on a minute? Hold on, I just have to. Yeah, hold on. Okay. Honey, do you have to leave? Yeah, about what time? Okay, I'm back. Right, okay. It's called a reading. It's called a reading, yeah. Okay, all right. It's the way we speak, you know. It's this language that captures, I think, all of who we are. I mean, I think its origins come from English and Spanish, and then the African languages that were that sort of okay. So the African languages that were a part of English and Spanish is a mixture of who we are. You know, we're African peoples. We have been colonized, and the English that we speak, or the language that we speak, the language reflects that colonization. I think what I've found so far is the first two books were written more in Jamaican English. The last two books are in sort of standard English. Um, when I would read, you know, I think people I made certain decisions. Like, for example, when I was writing the first novel, the very first draft of it was written in the language. Okay, so the first novel is Midnight Trial, and it's a novel about immigration. It's about a mother-daughter relationship, and a woman who immigrates from Jamaica to Boston, and tries to sort of jumpstart her family life. But when I first wrote that book, I tried to spell the words phonetically. You know, like I tried to stay as close as I could to patois, to the way that we actually would speak it and the way that it would sound, and I would try to spell the words in that way. But it actually was a lot harder to read, even by Jamaicans. You know, because I don't think we're actually used to seeing the language in print. And so I did many revisions, trying to get the language to be sort of to look more like standard English, but to sort of cut out certain words, and sort of create a syntax that would sound like Jamaican, but would actually look like standard English. Um, um, you know, people say that it sounds musical. I mean, that's what the American audience say. I don't know if it sounds musical. I think, I think we have a lot of things to say very quickly, and we don't always say them in complete sentences. So we leave out this and we leave out that, and but we still, yeah, yeah. We have a lot of, and we have a lot of things to say. You know, we just have commentary on everything, and we're saying it really quickly, and trying to find the language to capture everything that says in the peculiar way that we say things, you know, and trying to capture our expressions. Sort of writing that Jamaican English was really interesting, because when I would read what the critics would say about it, they said, Jamaicans don't really talk like this. And so I realized that what I've done is, I've kind of invented my version of Jamaican English. And perhaps when you read many writers who are writing in dialect, because there isn't one way of doing it, we're all sort of inventing a version of it. Right. So Yeah, I give myself about no more than 20 or 25 minutes because I figure by then people are tired, they want to stretch. It's hard to concentrate. I find it even when I go to readings hard to concentrate. Like the work has to sort of pull me in right away. It has to grab me, by my throat right away. And so I try to find a passage that will grab the reader, that will be of interest, that has a lot of tension, that, where, when listeners are listening, they're, like they're at the edge of their seats and they're, you know, pulling at themselves because they're so sort of tense. So I try to find a section that's tense and a good combination of narration that's just sort of description or thoughts and also dialogue because it's good to interrupt things with dialogue. A long stretch of narration can be a little boring, so I really try to find something that will hook them and keep them sort of engaged and invested. Because it as a writer, it's as a I tell my students this all the time. If they're not engaged by what they're writing, if they're not hooked, if when they're reading their own stories they don't find themselves, if their own if they're not racing, their own hearts aren't racing, trust me, your reader won't be racing. So you have to be able to listen to that in your own work. You have to find it in your own work. And if you find it and it has that impact on you, most likely it will have a similar impact on your reader. What? Oh, like read something? Oh, but I haven't I didn't know this was coming. Well, wait, I have to find a book. Okay. Um uh oh. Um oh. Hold on. Hold on. Um so this is like completely unexpected, right? So how much time do I have? Okay. But the thing about tension is that you have to sort of set it up for your reader. And no, okay. Okay, I'll read this little piece. It's something newer that I've been working on. Um, it's a short story that was invited for a collection of Caribbean ghost stories. It's not out yet, but I'll just read a little piece of it. How's that? And I hope it will be good enough for what you're trying to do. Um, so it's about this old woman who dies, but then she comes back to life. Do you think that would be good for your audience? Okay. So when she finally died, I was relieved. She died one cool, rainy afternoon with the sound of the water pelting the zinc roof and rivulets pooling across the window panes. She died sandwiched between my mother and her sister, my Aunt Doris, her head leaning on my mother's breast. She had been born in 1865, just 30 years after slavery ended. She was 107. The body was not sent to a morgue, but was washed and dressed in white and laid out in state in a cool, darkened corner of the house for family and friends to observe. The laying out lasted 3 full days and 3 full nights. A hog was slaughtered and left on a spit to roast slowly, its aroma stirring up the night. 3 goats were also butchered and thrown in a pot to make stew. Women with enormous breasts, dressed in white, with turbans on their heads, poured in from all over the district to cook and to sing mourning songs and to tell stories about the dead and to weep openly. An inordinate amount, an inordinate amount of rum and tobacco was consumed by the men who were hired to dig the grave and to hammer nails into the coffin, which they built from the limbs of mahogany trees that were plentiful on the property. The men, too, had long, winding tales about the dead, and they wept, their eyes red and bulbous with drink. Finally, Mameit was buried near the tomb where my mother's brother was also buried. But Mameit did not stay buried for long. Years later, in the middle of a deep and troubled sleep, she appeared at my bedside, surrounded by a great bounding light. She was smiling like an old friend. Her face was unlined, and she wore a big curly afro on her head. I was nearly 40 by then, had left Jamaica 20 years earlier, and was living in San Francisco in an apartment with a painter named Lucas. Come, she said. She put one hand on my heart. It was heavy and crowded with rings. It was also warm. It sank me into my feet. I sat up in bed at once. Lucas was beside me, snoring softly. What is this? I said out loud to no one. But there I was slipping into my shoes. I did not ask where. The pull was strong. The television was still on in the living room, and student papers were scattered on the coffee table. A white steed was waiting outside at the door near the metal mailboxes. It was not yet dawn, but dawn was rising. We leapt on the horse, my arms tight around Mamet's waist. The horse immediately grew wings, and we flew east towards the rising sun. How long? Impossible to tell. Below us were the endless stretches of grassland, magic caves hidden inside the crevices of ravines, volcanic mountains still vomiting fire and brimstone, endless roads that multiplied and divided, then appeared and disappeared again. It was neither hot nor cold. We stopped to rest under a tree. The horse stood off to the side to piss something long and steaming and rank. I bored deeper into the forest until I heard what sounded like ecstatic cries piercing the night. Off to the left, a mass of people materialized in the dark. I couldn't tell if they were men or women. They were uttering chants and incantations. There was a man in the midst, thrashing on the ground. I knew right away it was my father. I had never met my father in real life. He and my mother had had a brief encounter, and after I was born, a great silence shrouded his existence. He got off the ground to greet me. So you've come at last, he said. I'd been longing for this man all my life. I said this to him. We walked to a clearing where the bush had been burned away and tree stumps uprooted. There was a pullulating light about him, and when I could finally see, he had a face like a bird with iridescent blue-black feathers and a hooked bill. He pulled out a cigarette. I wanted to laugh. He was wearing a pinstripe suit. You're beautiful, he said, even more beautiful than your mother. His eyes were sparkling. What happened between you and her? Because of you, she has never loved me, I said. Why didn't you come back to get me? Did you even know about me? Yes, he says. Yes, he said, I've always known. Then why didn't you come? I started to cry. Why didn't you show yourself? He held me close. The beak felt like porcelain against my neck. He smelled of coconut oil. I've come now, he said. You're ready now. His arms inside the suit were skinny and strong. I lay there with my whole body burrowed into him. I didn't want to move. I wanted to nest. I wanted my whole body to take him like nectar. It was daytime now, and the sun beamed down gently on us. Oh, great. I'm glad. That piece is called Traveling because it's a whole series of adventures that she has with the dead woman, Mamet, and they're all journeys meant to assist her with her healing of her life, including meeting the father and their healings around that, and then, other aspects. Yeah, it's northern. I live in Northern California, and it's bright today, but the fog is coming in, and so it's getting a little cooler. Yeah, it's never gets really hot here. Like right here in the Bay Area where I live, this San Francisco, Berkeley, Oakland area, it's always in the 70s, or sometimes it goes up to 80, but it's always cool in the morning because of the fog. And then when the fog burns off, it gets a little warmer. But there's always a lot of good sunshine. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 I understand that. Yeah. 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 It's true. Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It is. Totally. Totally. In fact, our summer is really now. I mean, maybe summer is ending now, but summer is really late September and October and early November. That's the warmest time. Summers here are foggy and cold. It's true. Well, and there are pockets, that's the thing about the Bay Area too. Like you can be in San Francisco where it's cold, and then you go 10 minutes south and you have to wear a t-shirt, Um, and then you come over to the East Bay where I am, and then you need a little jacket. It's not as cold as San Francisco, but you need something more than your t-shirt. So there are all these little pockets. Cold is like, 50. Oh, I don't know what it would be for you guys. 50 Fahrenheit. I'd have to do the conversion on the computer. Yeah, where I live in the hills, some nights the temperature actually drops to freezing, but there's no snow. And and I love this weather. Like Boston was crazy cold. I love this. Like you can have roses growing all year round. And once the fog peels off, it's really, really lovely. But no, I mean, you never need a really heavy coat. You need just layers, and a fun hat. I sell it to everybody because every morning I wake up, I'm so excited. Well, okay, all right, maybe that's so, but I love all the trees and the flowers and the birds and the lights. Okay, okay, okay. Thank you, Royfield. It's been a real pleasure. Okay, thank you. Take it easy. Bye bye.